Hey guys, tonight we're not just staring at old ruins, we're decoding whispers from civilizations so ancient they make Rome look like a teenager. You're standing in a torchlit chamber, fingers grazing cool slabs of clay. Each slab is pressed, with tiny wedge marks arranged in neat rows like a very grumpy alien spreadsheet. You've arrived in Sumer, in what is now Iraq, and you're surrounded by the oldest written language on Earth, cuneiform. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe. But only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And if you're still awake enough to type, post your location and local time down below. I love knowing who else is wandering history's hallways this late at night. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You kneel beside a cracked tablet the size of a textbook, squinting at the patterns. At first, it looks like someone dropped a bunch of bird tracks on wet mud. But no, each triangle and line is a carefully poked symbol made with a reed stylus. The Sumerians weren't doodling. They were tracking barley shipments, temple donations, livestock numbers, and occasionally very passive-aggressive notes about temple workers being late. This is administration as immortality. The first Excel sheet, but baked, or cuneiform, started simple, just pictograms. But Sumerians, bless their busy minds, didn't stop there. Over centuries, the symbols grew abstract, morphed into a syllabic system, and ballooned into thousands of signs. It's like if emojis suddenly turned into full Shakespeare. You brush your fingers over one of the tablets and imagine a scribe bent over, muttering, maybe a little annoyed, recording yet another transaction for temple goats. The stylus scratches clay, someone sneezes, and history is quietly made. One mainstream fact? The earliest known full sentence in cuneiform reads, "A total of 29,086 measures of barley were received over the course of 37 months. Riveting, but also kind of wholesome. We don't always get pyramids and epics. Sometimes we get grain receipts, and thank goodness for them. Quirky side note? Some scribes sign their work, like, literally. One named Enhedu Anna didn't just sign, she published. High priestess of the moon, god Nana, poet, and possibly the first named author in history. Eat your heart out, Homer. Of course, historians still argue whether cuneiform began for religious, economic, or purely administrative reasons. Maybe it was all three. Maybe someone just got tired of forgetting where the goats went and invented writing out of sheer frustration. The writing didn't stay put either. The Akkadians borrowed it. The Babylonians fancied it up. The Assyrians made it their version of Times New Roman. Over 3,000 years, cuneiform became a pan-Mesopotamian megacode. You stand and turn to a wall lined with more tablets, some in shards. They aren't just numbers, they're stories. Myths like the Epic of Gilgamesh, tales of kings and floods, gods who throw tantrums, and humans who try to build too high. It's humbling to think that after thousands of years, one of the most famous lines still hits home. You will never find that life for which you are looking. You probably won't survive this, meaning, of course, you won't escape the pull of curiosity once you start decoding ancient scripts. It's addictive. Like Wordle, but the dictionary is 4,000 years dead and written in triangles. You exhale. Slowly, the torchlight flickers. For a second you think you hear the faint scratching of a stylus across clay. Probably just your imagination. Probably. Behind you, a display case holds a little clay envelope. Yes, an envelope. The Sumerians invented those too, sealed it, baked it, and boom, ancient snail mail. Scholars cracked one open and found a tiny contract inside, rent payments mostly. Even back then the rent was too high. One final glance before you leave. The symbols seem to shimmer, as if whispering secrets you don't quite understand. You tilt your head. Is that a deity's name?
Transaction? A curse? Maybe it's all three?
You shuffle forward through the low-lit gallery, and suddenly the walls rise higher, colder, smoother. Limestone. You know where you are now. Egypt. And not just any part of Egypt. You're standing at the base of the Great Pyramid of Giza.
Tilting your head so far back, it kind of hurts your neck. Go ahead.
Pretend you don't feel very small right now. The thing is, most people think of the pyramids as tombs. Sure they are. Kind of, maybe. But you're not here just for the afterlife real estate. You're here because something about the numbers doesn't add up, or rather, it adds up too perfectly. Your fingertips graze the stones, each block the size of a small car. It took over 2 million of them to build this thing, some weigh more than an elephant. They were quarried miles away, dragged, lifted, placed with uncanny precision. But it's not just the brawn, it's the brains. The base is almost a perfect square. The sides align to the cardinal points with freakish accuracy. The height and the base form a near-perfect golden ratio.
Oh, and if you multiply the height by 43,200, you get Earth's polar radius. Coincidence? Maybe. Probably. But maybe not. You wander into the dark interior, ducking into narrow stone tunnels that seem more suitable for cats than kings.
Your sandals scrape gently against the ancient stone floor, worn smooth by time and probably a few confused archaeologists who regretted wearing shorts. Mainstream historical fact: the Great Pyramid was built during the reign of Pharaoh Khufu, around 2560 BCE. It stood as the tallest man-made structure in the world for over 3,800 years. That's longer than any skyscraper has ever lasted, and without cranes or concrete, just ropes, copper tools, and enough unpaid labor to make your modern job feel cushy. Quirky tidbit: there's a small empty shaft inside the pyramid that seems to point directly at the belt of Orion. And people have been losing sleep over that ever since. Was it a celestial compass? An exhaust vent for the pharaoh's soul? Or a poorly placed hallway that happened to match the stars? Historians still argue whether the builders used ramps, levers, spiral inclines, or a whole lot of alien help. Okay, most historians don't argue that last one, but the internet certainly does. You pause in the so-called King's Chamber, feeling the pressure of rock above you, hundreds of thousands of tons, layered like a very deadly lasagna. The granite walls hum with silence. There's no writing here, no mural, just the cold geometry of ambition. Your fingers hover over the sarcophagus, empty. It was empty when explorers first found it. No mummy, no treasure, not even a note that says brub. Just echoing air and theories. You shift to one side and glance up at the ceiling beams. Massive granite blocks layered to keep the room from collapsing. Engineering, cold, brutal genius, and the math, the perimeter of the base. Divided by twice the height gives you pi. Not exactly, but really closer than you want it to be if you're trying to sleep tonight. Was it deliberate? Did ancient architects know about pi, or did it just happen? Historians debate it constantly. Some argue it's coincidence, others swear the Egyptians had a proto-pi from astronomical observations, and don't even get started on the temperature inside. The pyramid somehow maintains a constant 20 degrees C, 68 degrees S, regardless of the weather outside, which is cool, literally, thermodynamically suspicious too. You slide your palm along the angled passage leading back out. A little dust kicks up and you sneeze, which echoes, by the way, in a pyramid chamber. It's not dignified. Outside, the wind stirs the sand gently. The stones glow soft gold under moonlight. You wonder how many labourers stood exactly where. You're standing now? How many chisel marks? How many pulley ropes? How many hands?
And maybe, just maybe, how many people were trying to encode something deeper? Not just build a tomb, but a message, a structure that says, we were here, we knew things, you don't know what we knew. You take a final glance up the tapering
slope, all the way to the flattened peak. The casing stones that once gleamed white in the sun are mostly gone now, stolen, worn, or lost to time. But if you imagine hard enough, you can see the gleam, the glint of math, myth, and mystery. Behind you, someone coughs. You whirl around, no one's there, just shadows and wind. But honestly, after all this, would it be that surprising if Khufu popped out to check your geometry? You're back in the dark, but this time it's a humid, sea-scented dark, tinged with olive oil and distant thunder. You're not in Egypt anymore. You're standing at the edge of a sunken palace, just off the shores of Crete. Welcome to Knossos, capital of Minoan civilization and home to a labyrinth that may or may not have housed a man-eating bull. You take a step, and your sandals click against polished stone floors that have somehow survived 4,000 years of earthquakes, lootings, and bad archaeological guesses. The columns here taper downward, which feels wrong until you realize the Minoans did everything a little differently, like putting their plumbing inside their buildings, or painting dolphins above bathtubs. Priorities. The air is warm and oddly perfumed, maybe from the nearby storage rooms where ancient amphorae once held wine, oil, and the occasional experimental perfume. You wander through colourful hallways lined with frescoes, leaping bulls, bare-chested acrobats, and women in flounced skirts with eyeliner that could cut glass. Mainstream fact? Knossos was the largest Bronze Age archaeological site on Crete and possibly Europe's oldest city. It flourished from about 2000 to 1400 BCE and might have been the seat of the legendary King Minos, the guy with the labyrinth problem. Quirky side note, some historians think the myth of the Minotaur came from here, not from a literal man-bull hybrid, but from the terrifying complexity of the palace itself. Over 1,000 interlocking rooms, narrow staircases and sudden dead ends. If you got
lost, well, good luck. It wasn't a monster that ate you, it was the architecture. You pass by a winding corridor that opens into what looks like a throne room. Low stone chair, daubed red walls, and a basin for ritual washing. Or maybe for mixing
drinks, no one can say for sure. Historians still argue whether the central court was for political rituals, athletic events, or just group dancing. Honestly, any of those would work in this space. Then there's the writing. Two scripts, Linear A and Linear B. Linear B got cracked. Spoiler alert for a future section. But Linear A, still stubbornly silent. You look down at the floor and half expect the tiles to rearrange into answers, like a word puzzle waiting to click. One of the rooms holds a fresco of a strange scene. A youth grabbing the horns of a charging bull, somersaulting over its back and landing somehow on their feet. Bull leaping. A sport? A ritual? A dare gone very, very wrong? No one's sure. But someone painted it like it mattered. You peek into the storage hall, called a magazine, for reasons that make it sound way more fun than it is. Hundreds of giant pithoi, massive jars, once stood here, lined up like ancient filing cabinets. Some say this is where the wealth of Knossos was kept. Others say it's where the olive oil mafia of 1400 BCE operated. Either way, it smells like damp pottery and ancient ambition. Outside you hear the wind shift. Maybe it's the sea. Or maybe it's the rustling of that half-remembered myth, Theseus creeping through the dark, ball of string in hand, while the Minotaur breathes softly in the next chamber. You pause and consider how strange it is to build a palace with no defensive
walls, no towers, no visible fear of enemies. The Minoans weren't just rich, they were confident or incredibly naive. And here's a thing you can't unknow. Knossos might have been destroyed not by enemies but by nature.
A volcanic eruption on nearby Thera, modern-day Santorini, could have triggered tsunamis that devastated the coast. Or maybe it was earthquakes. Or maybe internal collapse. Or, most likely, all of the above. You crouch to look at one fragment of linear A carved onto a clay tablet. The symbols look like someone tried to combine geometry and cursive handwriting during a wine tasting. You squint. Is that a measurement of grain? A hymn? A menu? One symbol looks a bit like a stick figure doing yoga. Another looks like a beetle. It's beautiful. It's maddening and still unreadable. You move on, tracing your hand along the frescoed walls, half expecting them to ripple. Somewhere in this ruin, someone knew what all of this meant. Someone could have guided you through the maze without breaking a sweat. Too bad they've been gone for 3,000 years. You step outside again, and the wind off the Aegean hits you like a whisper. The palace behind you rises in layers, stone and color, myth and fact. You look back once, and for just a moment the shadows shift. You almost see the horns. You blink, and now you're surrounded by parchment and stone, but it smells like desert salt and warm wool. You're not in a palace or a pyramid. You're in a cave, one of the ones near the Dead Sea, tucked inside the rocky cliffs like an ancient mailbox for secrets. The air is still, like it's waiting for someone to read what was hidden here 2,000 years ago. That someone, tonight, is you. You reach out toward a clay jar. The lid is cracked. Inside, scrolls, lots of them, some wound tight, others crumbling to the edges. Welcome to the Dead Sea. Scrolls, biblical texts, community rules, apocalyptic visions, and a surprising number of laundry-related notes. No judgment. You've written weirder stuff in your phone's notes app. Mainstream fact. The Dead Sea Scrolls were discovered between 1947 and 1956 in 11 caves around Qumran, and they contain some of the oldest known surviving copies of the Hebrew Bible. Some date back to the 3rd century BCE. That's over 2,000 years of paper cuts just waiting to happen. You carefully unroll one parchment. The letters are in Hebrew script, crisp and clean despite their age. Some passages are familiar, like Isaiah, word for word, but then the scroll veers into territory that's less familiar. There's a rule about not spitting in communal areas, another about keeping 2/3 of your body in shadow during sacred rituals. There's even a text that outlines how to fold linens for temple duty. You wonder if the Essenes, the sect believed to have written these, were prophets or really picky roommates, quirky tidbit? There's a scroll called the Copper Scroll. Unlike the others, it's literally etched into sheets of metal, and it reads like a treasure map. It lists dozens of hidden stashes of gold and silver, like a biblical episode of Storage Wars. To this day, no one's found a single one of those treasure hoards. Either someone already beat us to it, or the scroll was the world's oldest practical joke. You trace the ink with a fingertip. It's made of carbon black mixed with oil or honey. The scroll crackles slightly, just enough to make you wince. Maybe don't breathe too hard near this one. You pull back and glance around the cave. It's not fancy, just a hollow in the limestone, but this was a fortress of ideas, a shelter against the Roman Empire, a time capsule of fear, faith, and fanatical attention to detail. Historians still argue whether the scrolls belong to a single group like the Essenes, or if the caves were just a storage depot for whatever books people wanted to keep away from rampaging armies. It's possible this was more of a bring-your-own-scroll situation. Outside, the sun glares off the salt crusts of the Dead Sea. It's too hot for epiphanies, but that doesn't stop you from squinting at the horizon and imagining what it was like to write by torchlight, ink thick and glistening on sheepskin, hoping someone in the future would understand. One of the scroll fragments contains a section from the Book of Giants, a lost text that didn't make it into the Bible. It talks about fallen angels and their enormous offspring. It's wild. You wonder if the scribe was jotting it down while thinking, this one's going to raise some eyebrows. You step into a different chamber where fragments are mounted behind glass. Each one is tagged, catalogued, and gently preserved. You notice one has been sewn back together with thread, like a papery Frankenstein. Some even have notes scribbled in the margins, basically ancient sticky notes. Don't forget to update this when we move the goat pens. Or possibly, we need to rewrite this hymn, it's too whiny. You lean closer and read a scroll fragment that simply says, "And then there shall be a great silence." You pause. The cave is too quiet now, like it's listening. Suddenly the stillness makes you feel like an intruder. These weren't written for you. Or maybe they were. Maybe they were meant for anyone who would listen long after the original. Readers turned to dust. You step back into the sun, scrolls safe behind you, and feel the sting of dry wind across your face. Some of the greatest secrets from antiquity were scribbled on parchment and hidden in jars, not carved into stone, not cast in bronze, just written down, folded, tucked away. You walk slowly down the rocky path, one step at a time, thinking about how many scrolls didn't survive. What was in the missing pieces? Love letters, recipes? A definitive answer to all of this? Maybe we'll never know. But still, you were here. You saw them. And tonight, they sleep again. Now the air changes again. Warmer, thicker, buzzing with the scent of jungle rain and crushed flowers. You wipe your forehead and glance up at a stone temple half swallowed by vines. Welcome to Mesoamerica, where time curls like a serpent and the writing slithers with it. You've arrived at the world of the Maya and the calendar that made everyone freak out in 2012. You step carefully onto a carved stone staircase, each riser decorated with glyphs, tiny portraits of gods, kings, jaguars, corn teeth, and something that might be a bat with a speech bubble. Mayan writing doesn't look like any alphabet you know. It's part script, part sculpture, part fever dream, and it's beautiful. Mainstream fact? The Maya developed one of the most sophisticated writing systems in the pre-Columbian Americas, made up of over 800 hieroglyphs. They used it to record everything from historical events to astronomical data to royal gossip. The earliest known examples date back to around 300 BCE. You pause to examine a stela, a tall stone slab covered in glyphs and images. It shows a ruler in an elaborate headdress standing on what appears to be a mountain of bones, or possibly corn. Honestly, it's hard to tell. You reach out and trace the curling lines of a glyph that scholars say could represent the sound bar, or maybe a word for head. Or maybe it means something else entirely, because Maya glyphs can be phonetic, logographic, or just really confusing. Fringe tidbit? For decades, people thought we'd never crack the code. It wasn't until the 20th century that scholars like Yuri Norisov and Linda Skeeler started making real progress. Before that, most experts just stared at the glyphs and muttered things like, maybe it's a calendar? Speaking of which, yes, the calendar. Remember 2012, when everyone thought the world was going to end because a Mayan calendar ran out? Turns out it didn't run out. It just rolled over to a new Baktun, a unit of roughly 394 years. It was the Mayan version of New Year's Eve, not Doomsday. But try telling that to the internet. You walk through a crumbling archway into what was once a temple chamber. Faint red paint still clings to the walls. Glyphs are etched in horizontal bands, royal births, wars, ball games, maybe an ad for maize. You run your fingers over one and for a second you think you see it twitch. Historians still argue whether Mayan writing was taught only to the elite or shared more widely. Most surviving texts come from monuments and codices, suggesting they were mostly used by scribes and priests, ancient nerds with access to divine Wi-Fi. You reach the foot of a stairway with a giant glyph for Ajor, Lord or King. It looks like a face in a jaguar mask sneezing. You mutter Ajor under your breath and feel oddly regal. Then you trip on a root and your ego resets. You pause by a partially intact codex, one of only 4 known to survive the Spanish conquest. The rest were torched. Why? Because the Spanish thought the books were works of the devil, which, in hindsight, was not their best moment. The pages are made of bark paper, folded like an accordion, inked with glyphs, star charts and gods, doing interpretive dances. You can almost hear the chanting. One panel shows a figure vomiting stars. It might be metaphor, or maybe dinner didn't sit well. Either way, the Maya had a knack for weaving cosmology and daily life into one giant divine spreadsheet. Every eclipse, every harvest, every king's haircut, recorded and ritually synced with the universe. You think back to the calendar and its infamous long count. The Maya tracked time in layers: kin, day, winal, 20 days, tun, 360 days, ketun, baktun, and more. It's not just a calendar, it's a cosmic engine. Each date connected to the gods, to myth, to the movements of Venus. You glance up at the night sky now and see Venus winking back. The Maya tracked it with spooky precision. Its risings and settings were tied to battles, sacrifices, and coronations. Makes your Google Calendar feel lazy. As you head back down the temple stairs, the stone seems to breathe. Not literally, of course, but the glyphs pulse with meaning you almost grasp. Almost. You stop beside a wall with graffiti. Yes, even in ancient temples, someone had to scratch their name into the corner. One carving shows a figure with comically large feet kicking a ball. Was it a joke, a sports fan, or the Mesoamerican version of Kilroy was here? You turn one last time to look at the glyphs, layered like whispers, past, future, myth, and maze. You won't crack all the codes tonight, but you'll carry the shape of them with you like echoes that haven't quite stopped echoing. You step out of the jungle's mist and into the dry silence of a stone corridor lit by torchlight. The air smells of sand and old papyrus, but there's a strange fluttering sound, like feathers rustling against limestone. You've arrived. In ancient Egypt again, but not inside a pyramid. No, this time you're standing in a temple courtyard where walls speak in pictures and birds seem unusually opinionated. Hieroglyphs. You raise your eyes to a wall carved top to bottom with elegant symbols. Owls, eyes, reeds, snakes, and a whole lot of birds that look vaguely annoyed. Egyptian hieroglyphs are the epitome of aesthetic.
Overload, both beautiful and maddening. You're not just reading a language here.
You're decoding a visual symphony composed by people who never met a pun they didn't like. Mainstream fact? Hieroglyphs were used in ancient Egypt for over 3,000 years. They weren't just a writing system, they were an art form, reserved mostly for sacred and ceremonial contexts. Common folk used a simplified script called hieratic and later demotic for more casual things like grocery lists and passive-aggressive notes about chariot parking. You run your hand across the sun-warmed
Stone.
Each glyph is carved so meticulously you wonder if the scribe was more sculptor than writer. Take the ibis-headed god Thoth, for instance. He shows up everywhere. God of wisdom, writing, and moonlight. Basically, the divine patron of late-night study sessions and overworked copy editors. There he is again, holding a scribe's palette, standing next to a baboon who looks deeply unimpressed.
And next to them, rows of hieroglyphs spiraling into stories, spells and speeches no one's heard in thousands of years. Quirky tidbit. There's a hieroglyph for sneeze. It looks like someone bent over with a dramatic squiggle flying out of their mouth.
Historians suspect it might have also meant to announce. But let's not ruin the fun. You move along a wall where a pharaoh, possibly Ramesses II, poses mid-stride, arm raised, face calm, smiting an enemy who is helpfully shown much smaller. You've got to admire the artistic commitment to propaganda. The accompanying glyphs say something like, "Mighty is the falcon of the sun who brings low the rebels with his radiant might," which, roughly translated, means, don't mess with this guy, seriously. You squint at a column of symbols. Some are phonetic. They stand for sounds. Others are logographic. They stand for whole ideas or words. And then there are determinatives, which are like emoji used to clarify context. You read a sequence. Water, ripple, eye, folded cloth, scarab, duck. You laugh softly. Is it a royal name, a riddle, or just ancient lorem ipsum? Historians still argue whether Egyptians viewed writing as divine communication or simply administrative necessity. The truth probably lies somewhere in between. Some scrolls contain detailed bureaucratic records, like who owes how many jars of beer. Others, spells to ensure your soul doesn't get eaten by a crocodile-headed hippo in the afterlife. Equal parts tax and terror. You pause at a doorway where the famous opening of the mouth ritual is depicted. A priest touches the lips of a statue, or mummy, with a ceremonial tool shaped like a fish. Why? To restore the deceased's ability to eat, speak, and breathe in the next world. You can't help but wonder what kind of afterlife requires such precise dental rituals. Then you think about the Book of the Dead, which, despite the title, is more like a travel guide, complete with spells, passwords, and optional upgrades. It wasn't one single book either, but a collection of texts customized for the buyer. Some were mass-produced for those on a budget, others fully illustrated deluxe editions. Ancient Egypt, home of the first tiered subscription model. You glance up at the stars now carved into a ceiling and think about how long it took to decode any of this. Enter the Rosetta Stone. Discovered in 1799, it had the same text in 3 scripts: Greek, Demotic, and hieroglyphs, like a trilingual cheat sheet. Scholars stared at it for years, drooling, until Jean-François Champollion finally cracked the code in 1822. Sort of. He realized some hieroglyphs were phonetic, and suddenly names like Cleopatra and Ptolemy jumped out of the stone like magic. You try whispering one of those names. The sound echoes faintly against the carved walls. In one shadowed corner, you find graffiti, not unlike what you'd see in a bathroom stall. A scratched note in demotic script reads something like, I visited here and did not like the beer. Honest reviews are timeless. You step out of the temple, blinking against the desert sun. You've only scratched the surface. Thousands of inscriptions still line tombs, temples, sarcophagi, even the undersides of coffins. That's right. Messages were written where no one would see them. Except, maybe, the gods. Or very confused archaeologists. The ibis-headed, watches from the wall as you go. His beak is unreadable, but somehow you feel like he approves. Now the heat fades. You're standing in a cool museum vault, lit only by overhead lamps and the soft hum of air conditioning, because where you're going next, mold is the enemy. Before you lies a table lined with cracked tablets, the color of
overbaked bread, the script carved into them, blocky, dense, and suspiciously obsessed with olives. Welcome to Linear B, the script of the Mycenaeans, the bureaucrats of the Bronze Age. You pull up a wooden stool and lean in close. Each tablet is small, maybe the size of a paperback, but it's crammed with lines of symbols, triangles, crosshatches, boxy characters, and one that might be a dog wearing a hat. The Mycenaeans didn't write novels or philosophy. They wrote receipts, inventories, deliveries, the juicy stuff, mainstream fact. Linear B is the earliest known form of written Greek. It was used mostly between 1450 and 1200 BCE across the Mycenaean palaces of places like Pylos, Knossos, and Mycenae itself. But it wasn't deciphered until 1952, when a self-taught British architect named Michael Ventris figured out it was Greek, just a very weird early version, quirky tidbit. One of the most common words in Linear B is ono, which means wine. If you're going to preserve one word from history, that's a solid choice. You squint at one line of script on a tablet from Pylos. The translation: to the palace, 3 wheels, 2 jars of honey, 5 pigs. You blink. That sounds like your last online order. You half expect to find estimated delivery, 2 lunar cycles. This isn't poetry or prophecy. This is logistics. The Mycenaeans were excellent at stockpiling, counting, rationing, and losing it all anyway when their civilization collapsed in a mysterious wave of fire and forgetting. Classic. Historians still argue whether Linear B was used solely by scribes or whether it had broader literacy. The tablets suggest a top-down structure, palace economies controlled by central offices. You didn't just raise pigs, you registered pigs. You didn't press olive oil without the proper form signed in triplicate. You flip through some photograph copies of tablets. They were mostly written on wet clay, then dried, often accidentally fired during the fires that burned the palaces down. Irony: your ancient to-do list becomes immortal because the palace went up in flames. There's a lesson there. Probably. You run your finger across a list of names. These aren't mythical heroes. These are workers, farmers, women, assigned textile, duties, herders, managing flocks. People who existed for exactly as long as they appeared on the records. It's humbling. It's also kind of touching. They're still on the job 3,000 years later. There's one famous fragment with a note about preparation of chariots for war. It lists wheels, axles, horses, and the number of chariot frames completed. No mention of who's driving them, or where they're going. Just the hardware, carefully recorded. Another lists women and their assigned duties: spinning wool, weaving cloth, offering to deities. Some are labeled captives, others servants of the gods. You pause. It's not just a ledger. It's a snapshot of class, labor, maybe even trauma. You tilt the tablet slightly. The incisions catch the light, and for a moment you can picture the scribe at work, reed stylus in hand, brow furrowed, double-checking how many goats were owed to Poseidon that week. Spoiler:
It's always too many goats. The language itself is rigid, functional, but strangely melodic once you pronounce it aloud. Ako ro damo, e re pate. Names, titles. Unknown. Each phrase feels like the beginning of a story. That cuts off just as it gets interesting. Historians suspect these tablets were never meant to be permanent. They were more like sticky notes or seasonal spreadsheets. Once the data was no longer needed, it could be discarded or rewritten. But then came the fire. And what was meant to be ephemeral became historical bedrock. You notice something else. Linear B was based on an earlier script, Linear A. But while we've cracked B, A remains undeciphered. It's like solving the sequel but still being stumped by the original. You can't help but wonder, what if Linear A wasn't Greek at all? What if it was Minoan? Or something else entirely? The trail ends in ash. You look at the shelf of tablets, still dusty, still half deciphered, and you think, this is the bureaucracy of a forgotten world, the ordering system for a civilization that vanished like smoke but left behind its shopping lists. You push your stool back and stretch. Somewhere, Michael Ventris is probably smiling. He cracked a code that had been dead for 3,000 years, with no AI, no Google Translate, just stubborn brilliance and graph paper. You look down at one last tablet before leaving. It says, "To the gods, 1 cup of honeyed wine." You nod, quietly respectful. That, you think, is the most ancient phrase of all. Now you're somewhere dustier, quieter, stranger. You're standing in front of a small glass case containing something that shouldn't be quite so mysterious, and yet it is. A small, square seal, barely the size of a cookie, carved with symbols that look like elephants playing Tetris. No translation, no Rosetta Stone, no helpful scribbled notes. Just silence. You've arrived in the Indus Valley. More specifically, the ruins of Mohenjo-Daro and Harappa, home to one of the world's earliest urban civilizations, and arguably the quietest. Their writing system? Still undeciphered, not for lack of trying, just stubbornly mute mainstream fact. The Indus Valley civilization flourished around 2600–1900 BCE in what is now Pakistan and northwest India. They had grid-like cities, standardized weights, underground sewage systems, and possibly, brace yourself, the world's first public toilets. But their script? It's never been cracked. You lean closer to one of the famed soapstone seals. It's got an animal, maybe a unicorn, maybe a goat having an existential crisis, and above it, a series of tiny markings. Just a few symbols, usually less than 5. Always short, always frustrating. Some look like fish. Others resemble arrows, spools, combs, and pots. No one knows if these are letters, syllables, numbers, or just really fancy branding logos. Some scholars even speculate the seals may have worked like trademarks used by merchants to identify their goods. Picture a Bronze Age version of Made in Harappa. Quirky tidbit. One seal has a row of symbols followed by what looks like a dude in a yoga pose, surrounded by animals. Some say it's a proto-Shiva figure. Others say he's just vibing. Either way, it makes you want to stretch your shoulders and breathe deeply. You walk past cases of pottery, jewelry, and tiny, perfect weights, all standardized across hundreds of miles. These people were organized, really organized, but they left no monuments, no royal tombs, no dramatic murals of battles and conquests, just neat rows of bricks and seals. Historians still argue whether the Indus script is even a full language. Some believe it's proto-writing, a symbolic system, more mnemonic than phonetic. Others insist it's a complete script, lost only because the language it represents has no modern relatives, like finding an iPod without a charger and no idea what the buttons do. You pause in front of a brick from Mohenjo-Daro, etched faintly with lines that might just be erosion, or maybe ancient writing. The temptation to see meaning everywhere becomes a quiet little ache. You want the bricks to speak. You want them to whisper something, but they don't. There's no bilingual text, no long inscriptions, no version of a Mayan stele or Egyptian wall. Most of the script comes from small items, seals, pots, and tablets the size of sticky notes, and, frustratingly, they're too short for pattern recognition. No Rosetta Stone, no Enigma machine, just a lot of squinting. Still, some of the symbols are oddly familiar. One looks like a sideways fish skeleton, another like a rounded trident. You imagine a scribe etching these by lamplight, muttering to themselves about shipment manifests or ritual recipes or neighborhood drama. You flip through a replica of the famous dancing girl statue, one of the most iconic artifacts from the Indus Valley. She's bronze, confident, standing with one hand on her hip, like she just crushed a pottery contest. Her jewelry suggests status. Her pose suggests attitude. Her civilization, however, remains mute. You think of the Great Bath. In Mohenjo-Daro, a massive public structure likely used for ritual cleansing. It was waterproofed with bitumen, lined with bricks more uniform than your modern sidewalk. And it predates Roman plumbing by nearly 2,000 years. But again, no inscriptions. Not a single sign that says, "Please wash before entry," or
No running. The bath remains silent. Sacred, maybe. Mysterious, definitely. You wander to another display, a series of tiny tablets with rows of symbols so compact and precise they look machine-carved.
They weren't. They were handmade by scribes whose names we'll never know, using tools we haven't quite reconstructed. You stare until the symbols start to resemble code, but the code won't crack. Some researchers even tried feeding the script into AI. The results? Mixed. Some patterns emerged, but without more context, without longer texts or a key, AI can only hum softly, in confusion, just like the rest of us. You sit for a moment on a bench near the exit. The Indus Valley didn't leave behind glorious epics, bombastic kings, or lists of enemy heads. Just balance, bricks, quietness, and a language that remains locked behind symbols that look like fish and combs. It's tempting to romanticize that silence. Maybe they lived in peace. Maybe they didn't need grand declarations. Or maybe we just haven't found their library yet. You close your eyes and imagine the scribe, careful, deliberate, carving a seal that says exactly what they meant. You open your eyes and realize we still have no idea what that was, but we're trying. You're out in the open again now, but this time the sun is harsher, and the rocks under your feet feel ancient in a way that makes your ankles suspiciously aware of their own age. You're surrounded by boulders, massive ones, scattered like forgotten building blocks across a vast, open landscape. But look closer. These stones are not just rocks, they're messages, thousands of them. Welcome to the world of petroglyphs, history carved one scratch at a time. You kneel beside a slab where spirals twist and deer leap, and human stick figures hold up their tiny arms in poses that could mean, "Look at the stars," or, "Please, stop asking me what this means." You're not in any one place now. This story is global. Petroglyphs are everywhere. Utah, Australia, Scandinavia, the Sahara. Humans everywhere just really loved carving rocks. Mainstream fact. Petroglyphs. Images pegged, scratched, or chiseled into stone date back tens of thousands of years. Some are as old as 40,000 BCE. They predate writing. They might not even be writing at all, but they are communication, and they're still here. You trace the outline of a bison, its curve worn by centuries of wind. Nearby is a sunburst, a handprint, a row of dots. What do they mean? A hunt? A prayer? An early attempt at saying, "I was here"? Scholars aren't sure. Some petroglyphs are obvious, others downright cryptic. Quirky tidbit? There's a petroglyph site in Sweden where boats are carved upside down. Some scholars think it indicates death, a journey to the underworld. Others think it was just a perspective issue. Either way, ancient Swedes weren't shy about boat content. You step farther into the site and spot something newer, relatively speaking. Concentric circles carved into basalt in New Mexico. The Pueblo peoples etched them long ago, maybe to track it. Solstices or mark sacred spaces. You align your shadow and, yep, the sun hits the circle just right. It feels like a cosmic nudge. Nearby you find stick figures with strange head shapes. Some resemble helmets, or possibly really dramatic hairstyles. Fringe theorists scream aliens, but you whisper maybe ceremonial masks, and the rocks seem grateful. Historians still argue whether petroglyphs are proto-writing, symbolic art, or just prehistoric expressionism. Some clearly depict scenes, a hunter chasing prey, a shaman transforming into a deer. Others are abstract, dots, zigzags, spirals that might represent maps, music, dreams, or just a good time. You crouch by a carved wall in the Australian outback, where the dream-time stories of the Aboriginal peoples unfold in stone. Serpents winding across ridges, ancestral figures melding with the land. These are not just marks, they're memory, carved geography, lore anchored in rock. You touch a carving from Val Camonica in Italy. It's a solar disk above a row of weapon-bearing figures. Ancient war report, ritual drama, gladiator fan art. You try to guess, but the stone just stares back, politely withholding its secrets. Some petroglyphs come with surprises, like one in Arizona showing a dinosaur-looking creature. Cue internet conspiracies. But paleontologists gently remind everyone, artistic license is a thing, and sometimes a lizard just looks suspiciously dramatic. And here's a fun one. Some petroglyphs interact with their landscape. In Hawaii, lava tubes were carved to catch moonlight on certain nights. In Ireland, some Neolithic carvings only light up during the winter solstice. These weren't doodles, they were installations. You pause at a tall rock with carvings too, faint to see clearly. You lean in, shade it with your hand, and there it is. A human figure with antlers, not hunting prey, becoming prey, or spirit, or both. In some cultures, shamans wore animal disguises during rituals. Maybe this was a self-portrait, maybe it was a warning. You look up. All around you, the rocks are telling stories, not in lines or paragraphs, in symbols, in echoes. You can't read them, not fully, but you can feel them. Like a drum beat you're not quite dancing to, but still tapping your foot. You start to notice patterns. Certain glyphs repeat across continents, spirals, handprints, animals mid-leap. These were the shared dreams of early humanity. Carved, not written, seen, not spoken. Historians debate whether petroglyphs count as a code in the linguistic sense, but you're not so sure that matters. These marks, chipped with stone tools, traced by smoke-darkened fingers, are more than messages. They're memory made visible. As you leave the site, you pass a rock where someone, recent no doubt, has scratched a smiley face next to a 3,000-year-old elk. You sigh. Humans never change. Still you look back once more at the carvings, catching the last golden light of dusk. The rocks are quiet, but not silent. They just speak in a slower language, one measured in echoes, shadows, and time. You step down into a room that smells of ash and old bones. It's dark, but not ominous, more like the hush of reverence. Laid out in a display before you are delicate shards of turtle shell, some cracked, some scorched, all carved with tiny, angular strokes. You've arrived in Shang Dynasty China around 1200 BCE, and these are oracle bones, the first Chinese writing, and possibly the most dramatic use of a turtle in history. You kneel beside one of the larger shells. It's been carefully cleaned and polished, but the cracks still run deep, like a dried riverbed. Along the edge, you see fine etchings, little strokes grouped in neat rows. This isn't decoration, this is divination. A Bronze Age Q&A with the universe, mainstream fact. Oracle bones were used by Shang Dynasty diviners to ask questions of ancestral spirits and deities. They'd heat the bones, often ox, scapulae, or turtle plastrons, until they cracked, then interpret the fissures. The questions, answers, and results were inscribed alongside. It's like a cosmic customer service log etched into livestock parts. You read one inscription slowly. Will the king's toothache worsen in the next 3 days? Wow. Same energy as Googling your symptoms at 3 a.m., quirky tidbit? One bone records a question about whether a rainstorm would spoil the royal hunt. Another asks if a pregnant consort is carrying a boy. Another wonders whether sacrificing 10 sheep instead of 8 would please the river god more. The concerns range from grand omens to very relatable micromanagement. You lean closer. The script used here is the early ancestor of modern Chinese writing, logograms, not letters. Some characters are surprisingly recognizable. The word for sun looks like a square with a dot. Mouth is a little circle. Horse is already complicated because of course it is. You run a fingertip over one cracked surface. You can almost feel the heat that once split it, can almost hear the priest chanting, the king pacing, the fire popping as the shell blisters and blooms with lines of fate. Historians still argue whether these cracks were genuinely read as signs or just used to justify decisions already made. Maybe the king wanted to invade a neighbor and just needed a turtle to agree with him. Outside this quiet vault, the world of the Shang thunders with bronze weapons, court rituals and sacrifices. Not the fun kind either. But in here, it's all questions. The bones ask everything from will it rain tomorrow to should we offer 3 humans or 5. Casual, one record even shows the result of a prediction. It did rain, the reading was correct, which suggests someone was tracking oracle accuracy like Yelp reviews. This bone really gets me. You wander past a row of plastrons, all carefully arranged. Some are completely filled with text, edge to edge like ancient blog posts. Others bear only a single, weighty question. Will we win the battle? You wonder what happened after that one. You find a bone that simply asks, is the ancestor
Angry? There's no answer carved beside it. You don't know if that means yes.
or very yes? Oracle bones weren't just mystical tools, they were records, systematic, detailed, and very formal. The questions were dated, the diviners named, the outcomes noted. It was part ritual, part administration. The past was watching, and the paperwork had to be immaculate. You pass a display showing the process. First, the question was carved, then the bone was heated, then the cracks were interpreted, and only then was the verdict inscribed, all in one place. The question, the fire, the response, a divine feedback loop, filed forever. You step into a smaller chamber and find something unexpectedly touching. A child's name carved into a bone, surrounded by glyphs wishing for good fortune. No war, no harvest, just hope. You pause momentarily, unsteady. Historians believe the Shang kings saw writing not just as a human tool, but as a bridge between worlds. The spirits of ancestors weren't metaphor, they were real, available, and watching. And writing? Writing was how you showed respect. A note to the beyond, carefully addressed. You glance at the final bone on display. Its question, should the Queen fast before the eclipse? The reply, yes, she did. There's no mention of whether the fasting worked, no comment on the eclipse, just the ritual, recorded. You step back slowly. The room is quiet, heavy, with meaning. The turtles gave their shells, the oxen gave their bones, and the scribes gave us time capsules. The questions remain, even if the answers don't, and maybe that's the point. You climb now, not up a mountain, but up a gentle hill, crowned with mossy stones. The wind smells like pine and wet grass, and you can hear the rustle of distant trees. You're somewhere in early medieval Ireland or Scotland, standing before an upright stone that looks like it's grown from the ground itself. At first glance, it seems bare. Then, in the right light, you see them. A vertical line with short slashes branching off at precise angles. Welcome to Ogham, a script that looks like someone tried to write using only tally marks and tree branches. You kneel before the stone and run your hand along the central line, the stem of the inscription. Each notch, each hash mark, represents a letter. It's subtle, almost secret. You wonder how many people have walked past stones like this without realizing they're covered in text. Mainstream fact? Ogham, pronounced O-um, is an early medieval alphabet used to write the early Irish language. It first appeared around the 4th century CE, mostly on standing stones and grave markers. It's read from bottom to top, because of course it is, and often carved into the edge of a stone, like
a spine made of whispers, quirky tidbit.
Each Ogham letter is associated with a tree or plant in Irish tradition. So the letter B is Baith, birch, D is Dare, oak, and S is Sail, willow. It's less like reciting an alphabet and more like reciting a forest. You squint at this particular stone. The inscription reads something like, of Macu Lugni, son of Broen. A name, a lineage, a declaration. This wasn't a grand announcement. It was a quiet marker, a whisper to the earth. Historians still argue whether Ogham was created as a secret code for druids, a symbolic gift from tree spirits, or just a clever workaround for carving on rough stone without curves. Some even suggest it was invented. Help early Irish people write in their own language, away from the dominance of Latin. You stand now and circle the stone. Others dot the landscape, half sunk in the turf, leaning gently as if trying to nap. Some stones have simple messages. Others include crosses, showing how Christianity blended with the old scripts. Ogham wasn't erased. It adapted. You think of the scribes who carved these marks. No quills, no parchment, just chisel and stone. No long paragraphs either. Ogham wasn't meant for essays. It was meant for moments, for people, for places. You pass a smaller stone etched into a tree trunk pattern. The notches are so shallow you can barely see them. But someone, long ago, took the time to record a name that otherwise would have vanished. That's the heart of Ogham. Not glory, not law, just presence. You lean close to one stone where the inscription bends around the edge. The lines continue up, then curl slightly around the top, a stylistic flourish that suggests someone got a little playful. A medieval flourish, if you will. 1. Standing stone has a double line of ogham, possibly added centuries apart. You imagine someone discovering the old marker and deciding to add their own name beside it, like ancient graffiti. Me too, I was here, we both were. You glance up the hill and see a hawthorn tree growing near another marker. Its branches twist in the wind, whispering over the carved stone. The letter H in ogham is Uath, the hawthorn. Coincidence? Maybe. Or maybe the alphabet has come home. You pass into a grove where a reconstructed ogham stone alphabet stands in a circle. Each stone bears a letter, each tied to a tree. It feels like stepping into a classroom where the teachers are ancient stones and the lesson is patience. There's something calming about ogham. It doesn't shout, it doesn't decorate palaces, it's not trying to be immortal, it just remembers. You sit for a while beside one of the stones. The moss is soft, the notches barely visible. But if you listen closely, the letters speak in slashes and shadows, and the forest replies in wind. You take a final look back as the mist rolls in. The stones fade into grey outlines, but the letters stay with you. Little marks on big stones. Quiet records of people who, like you, walked, wondered, and left their names in the wind. You're deep in the Andes now, standing on a sun-washed terrace high above a green valley. Llamas blink lazily at you. The air is thin and crisp, and somewhere far off, water tumbles over stone. There's no ink here, no tablets, no carved letters, just strings, knotted, dyed strings, and somehow they contain messages. Welcome to the world of Quipus, the Inca civilization's ingenious method of recording data without writing anything at all. You kneel beside a quipu laid out like a peculiar octopus, a main cord with dozens of smaller strings hanging from it, each of those with knots tied in strange little clusters. At first glance, it looks like someone unraveled a child's art project. But this is not decoration. This is data. Mainstream fact? The quipu, sometimes spelled quipu, was a system of cords and knots used by the Incas and earlier Andean cultures to record numbers and possibly narrative information. Each knot represents a number, each string represents a category or item. It was a filing cabinet you could carry on your back. Quirky tidbit? Some quipus used llama or alpaca wool dyed in specific colors, possibly as a kind of visual shorthand. A yellow string could mean corn, a red one could mean warriors, a string dyed green and then faded by sun, possibly nothing, possibly the weather report. Historians are still arguing about that. You gently lift one of the pendant strings and notice the spacing of the knots. Some are tight and neat, others widely spaced. You count 3 figure-8 knots in a row. That might mean 300 or 30, or we need more potatoes. It depends on the cord's placement and twist matters. Clockwise or counterclockwise, that might change the entire meaning. Suddenly you're looking at a 3D spreadsheet, one with texture and motion and about 9 different possible interpretations depending on the angle. You find it weirdly soothing. Each quipu has a logic, just not your logic. You run your fingers over the strands, imagining the Quipuca Myox, the professional knot tiers, who once memorized thousands of these codes. They were the human hard drives of the empire. Historians still argue whether quipus could truly record language or if they were only numerical. The Incas definitely used them to count census data, harvest yields, military rosters. But some scholars now believe there were narrative quipus too, knot-based stories, poems told in fibre, a warm, silent kind of literature. One quipu, found buried alongside a high-status individual, contains more than 500 strings. No numbers make sense, no categories seem clear. Some say it's a funerary story, others think it's a warning, or a family history, or maybe a very long grocery list. You glance up at a stone wall nearby. There's no script, no letters. The Incas didn't carve their words into stone, they tied them into thread. It's the opposite of permanence. It's breath woven into wool. And yet, it lasted. You study a simplified display showing how numbers were encoded. One long knot for hundreds, a figure 8 for tens, simple knots for units, decimal-based, neat, efficient, like a kind of math origami. And still it's not just numbers. Some chords are dyed with multiple hues. Some are grouped in clusters, perhaps indicating nested categories, villages, clans, tax regions. You begin to see how a single quipu could contain a lot of information, more than a tablet, more than a page. You step over to a glass case displaying a reconstruction, an official from Cusco, head bowed, tying a message to be sent along the Chasqui network, the Inca courier runners. These messengers could sprint dozens of miles a day, passing quipus from station to station, like FedEx, but with sandals and less yelling. One record suggests a quipu was used to send a warning of rebellion, another to tally tribute paid in coca leaves. Still another may record the deaths of children during an outbreak, all in thread, all in silence. You close your eyes and imagine receiving such a message. No words, just fibre and form. You'd run your hands along the knots, the way someone today might scroll through a spreadsheet. You'd read through texture. The Inca never invented writing in the conventional sense, but maybe they didn't need it. They could count their world in knots. And perhaps once in a while, they could speak it that way too. You reach out to touch the edge of the display, just one soft, worn strand. It shifts slightly, and for a moment you almost see it move like a wave, like breath, like memory. Then it stills. The valley below stretches out in green quiet. Somewhere, centuries ago, a Quipucamayok finished tying one last knot and set it gently down beside a sleeping emperor. What he wrote? We may never know, but the thread still holds. You wipe the drizzle from your coat and step into the cold. The sky is iron grey. The wind smells like snow and pine sap. You're in Northern Europe now, maybe Norway, maybe Iceland. A lonely standing stone looms ahead, carved with long, straight lines that curve into sharp angles. It feels different than Ogham, less like a whisper, more like a quiet warning. These are runes, the alphabet of Norse and Germanic peoples, the writing system of Vikings, poets and smiths with excellent cheekbones and very dramatic beliefs. You crouch beside the stone. The runes are carved deep into the granite, made to last. They form neat rows, each character like a weapon in miniature. Angular, sharp, easy to carve with a chisel. You read a few aloud, softly. F, Fehu, for wealth. U, Uruz, for strength. The Thurisaz, for giants, or, let's be honest, trouble. Mainstream fact? The Elder Futhark is the oldest known runic alphabet, used from roughly the 2nd to 8th century CE. It contains 24 characters named after the first 6 letters, Futhark. They weren't just used for communication, they were symbols of power, carved into weapons, gravestones, and even combs. Because no object was too small for a little rune-based sass, quirky tidbit, One Viking Age runestone reads, "Thor wrote these runes in anger." Another says, in what is clearly the Norse equivalent of a tweet, "This is a stone, I raised it, I, Tholfir." Iconic. You circle the stone and the wind picks up. Your fingertips find a shallow inscription near the base, a message hidden. From casual view, it reads something like, "Eric carved this stone for Bjorn, a great man and a good friend." You don't know who Eric or Bjorn were. But now, here, so many centuries later, you do. Historians still argue whether runes were magical or purely practical. Most likely, they were both. Some inscriptions were meant to record names and deeds. Others were meant to shape reality, carved into amulets, charms, or swords to protect or empower their bearers. Think of them as text messages with divine backup. You pause beside a stone with a mix of runes and Christian symbols. By the 11th century, Scandinavia was shifting. Pagan gods were being traded for saints, but the runes remained. A little more church-friendly, perhaps, but still biting into stone like they meant it. You brush snow from another inscription. This one is poetic, a gravestone elegy, full of sorrow and pride. He rode far, gave gifts freely, and died with honor. You can feel the loss between the lines, the love that demanded to be carved letter by letter into a world that forgets. You walk now through a field of smaller stones. Some are toppled, some are lichen-covered. One is carved with a single rune, Isa, ice. The rune of stillness, of freezing in place, of silent strength. You feel it in your bones. There's humor here too. A runic graffito found in Sweden simply says, "Gunvalder was here." Another reads, "These runes were carved by the most skilled man in the valley, obviously me." Modesty wasn't a Viking virtue. You approach a reconstruction of a rune stick, a slender piece of wood used like a notepad. Messages were carved quickly and passed hand to hand. One stick, found in Bergen, says, "Come home, I'm cold and alone." It's dated to the 12th century, and suddenly your heart is not ready for how real these people were. You tilt your head. Why did they choose runes? Why keep carving when Latin scripts were taking over Europe? Maybe because runes belonged to the land, to the trees and stones and firelit halls. They weren't just letters, they were kin to the old gods. And each rune had a meaning. Not just a sound, but a concept. Fehu, cattle, and by extension, wealth. Tiwaz, the god of war and justice. Aiwaz, the yew tree, symbol of endurance. The alphabet was a worldview, compacted into symbols you could carry on your belt or scratch into your doorframe. You pass a monument stone bearing a memorial in the younger Futhark, a later, smaller alphabet used during the Viking Age. It's more streamlined, a bit like switching from calligraphy to Helvetica. But the weight remains. The stone reads, "He died on the sea. May the waves carry him gently." You look out across the frozen landscape and imagine a long ship vanishing into mist, sails full, a carved dragon at its prow. Somewhere in the hull, a sword etched with runes. Not for show, for remembrance. You stand still, snowflakes catching.
In your eyelashes, the runes on the stone behind you hold fast, and you realize they've done what they were meant to do. They've made someone, anyone, remember. Tonight, that someone is you.
You're in Italy now. Not the sun-drenched Renaissance Italy of Da Vinci and domes, but something older, hazier. The roads are quieter. The language sounds familiar until it doesn't. You're standing in a tomb staring at an inscription that curls across the stone like a lost sigh. Welcome to the forgotten language of the Etruscans and the alphabet that everyone can read, but almost no one can truly understand. You lean in. The letters look Roman. They are Roman. Well, sort of. The Etruscans used an early form of the alphabet that would later evolve into Latin, so you can sound it out slowly, syllable by syllable, but the meanings, mostly lost mainstream fact. The Etruscans thrived in central Italy from around the 8th to the 3rd century BCE. They built cities, traded widely, created vivid tomb paintings, and influenced Roman religion, architecture, and even fashion. But their language? It's a mystery with a very good poker face. Quirky tidbit. One of the longest Etruscan texts we've found is written on a linen burial cloth that had been recycled as mummy wrappings in Egypt. So yes, our best source of Etruscan grammar was found wrapped around someone's foot. You trace a carved inscription, Mia vils metelli chen letham. It means something like, I am of Aulus Metellus, this is the grave. Maybe. Probably. That's the fun of it. We have a bunch of inscriptions like this, but very few full translations. You read a sentence, feel proud, then realize you have no idea what half the words actually mean. Historians still argue whether Etruscan was a language isolate, a tongue with no known relatives, or if it descended from a pre-Indo-European family that got steamrolled by time and Romans. Theories abound. Proof, not so much. You look at a statue of the so-called Arringatore, the orator, a bronze man with his arm outstretched like he's telling a great story. His togas swishing dramatically. On his hem, an Etruscan inscription, his name, his lineage. But we don't know what he was saying. We just know he wanted it said. You step deeper into a rock-cut tomb. The walls are painted with banquets, dancers, and leaping dolphins. It's joyful, vibrant even, not gloomy at all. These were people who believed in a richly furnished afterlife, full of wine, music, and second chances. And yet, carved between the frescoes, the writing remains cryptic. You see words like Shutina, possibly tomb, and clan, probably son
of. They appear often, but context sparse. It's like someone handed you a beautiful dictionary missing every third word. There's even a bronze liver, yes, a liver, used for haruspicy, or divination by inspecting animal entrails.
The organ is engraved with Etruscan writing labeling different divine zones, part medical diagram, part cosmic blueprint. Unfortunately, it raises more questions than it answers. Also, you're now thinking about livers more than you ever wanted. 2. You move on to a stela with vertical writing. That's another Etruscan quirk. The direction changes. Some texts run right to left, others Boustrophedon style, switching directions every line like a ploughing ox. Because reading should be cardio, apparently. You pause beside a funerary urn. The figure carved on its lid reclines with a faint smirk.
As if amused by your confusion, the inscription says simply, Larth Velchus, son of Arnth, gave this. You nod respectfully. Thank you, Larth. Still don't know what Velchus means, though. You pass by the Tabula Cortanensis, one of the few longer Etruscan texts we've got. It's a bronze tablet outlining a land deal, who owns what, who sold what to whom, and possibly how many goats were involved. A few hundred words, most of them still fuzzy. It's like being handed a contract in perfect cursive for a language. You almost, but not quite, understand. There's something beautiful and maddening about it. The Etruscans left behind so much art, engineering, urban planning, but not the key to their words.
No Rosetta Stone. Just fragments, phrases, funerary cliches. You stand still in the fading light, surrounded by painted tombs and stones that almost make sense. The silence here is different. It's not that no one's speaking, it's that they're speaking just beyond your reach. Maybe that's why it lingers. You close your eyes and whisper one of the words you do know. Shuthina.
A tomb, a place of rest, and maybe a whisper that waits for someone, anyone, to remember how to listen.
You hear waves now, soft, distant, rhythmic, as if the island itself is breathing. The air is salted, damp, and oddly still. You've landed on Rapa Nui, also known as Easter Island, and this place is different. It feels like a question no one's been able to answer for centuries. You walk past the towering Moai statues, those solemn, long-faced guardians of stone, and stop in front of something smaller. Stranger. A narrow wooden tablet scorched at the edges, covered in symbols that spiral and dance across the surface, like a riddle in motion. This is Rongo Rongo, a script so mysterious, we're not even sure if it's truly writing at all. Mainstream fact? Rongo Rongo is a system of glyphs discovered in the 19th century on wooden artifacts from Easter Island. The symbols are carved in lines, often Boustrophedon style, meaning the text goes left to right on one line, then flips and goes right to left on the next. Like reading while doing cartwheels. You crouch beside one of the surviving tablets, protected behind glass now. There are fewer than 30 Rongo objects left in the world. Most were destroyed, burned by missionaries, rotted by humidity, or used as firewood. That last one? Ouch. Quirky tidbit? Some glyphs look like fish. Others are birds, crescent moons, lizards, geometric flourishes, or what might be dancing humans, or maybe just extremely excited plants. One figure has a comically oversized head, arms akimbo, and seems to be in mid-conversation with a turtle, as you do. Historians still argue whether Rongo is an actual written language or a proto-script, a ritual memory aid or decorative symbol set. Some researchers think it encodes genealogies, calendars, or chants. Others believe it was never truly read, but instead performed, chanted, or visualized during rituals. In other words, interpretive dance, but for literacy. You try to follow the carving with your eyes, but the patterns resist you. They're not organized like Mayan glyphs or Egyptian hieroglyphs. There's no clear punctuation, no known translation. The Rapa Nui people may have developed this script independently after contact with European explorers, but that's hotly debated. Some argue it predates contact, others say it was inspired by exposure to outside writing. Either way, the key is gone. You pass your hand near a replica of the Santiago staff, the longest surviving Rongo text, about 2.5 feet long, with over 2,300 glyphs etched into its surface. So far, no one's fully deciphered even one sentence. It's like having a book you can hold, admire, maybe even love, but never truly read. You walk through a dimly lit gallery of glyphs enlarged on the walls. Some lines look repeated, suggesting structure, maybe even grammar, but with no bilingual text and no native speakers left, the script remains mute. Scholars have tried analyzing frequency, patterns, even matching glyphs to lunar cycles. But the language, if it is one, stays just out of reach. One display shows a decipherment attempt from the 1980s. A proposed reading of 3 glyphs, man, fish, crescent. The theory? It represents a fisherman praying to the moon bait, a good catch, but it could also be chief sleeps with turtle, or bad omen, don't go swimming. There's no Rosetta Stone here, just hope. You pass a plaque with a quote from Catherine Routledge, one of the earliest Western researchers. On the island, the tablets are sacred, and no one dares to read them. You imagine an elder sitting by a fire, tracing those symbols with a fingertip, telling stories only memory could preserve. It's possible the knowledge of Rongorongo was lost in a single generation due to colonization, disease, slavery, or religious suppression. Oral traditions disrupted, cultural continuity snapped, the fire kept burning but the words vanished into smoke. You stop in front of a smaller artifact, a curved piece of driftwood with only a handful of glyphs. It looks like a poem or a shopping
list or a warning. The ambiguity tugs at you, gentle and insistent. One symbol looks like a birdman, a central figure in Rapa Nui mythology.
Every year, warriors would race down cliffs, swim through shark-infested waters and steal an egg from an islet offshore to claim the title. Maybe this glyph honors that ritual, or maybe it just says, "Don't forget your spear." You step outside and feel the ocean breeze again. The Moai stand tall, staring inland. Behind them the horizon glows faintly. The island is quiet, but it hums with unanswered questions. Why did the script disappear? What stories were carved in those tablets? Who was meant to read them? And what happens when no one can? Still, someone once picked up a carving tool. Someone once scratched meaning into wood and whispered, "This matters." You look down at the swirling symbols one last time. They don't move, but something about them lingers, like the echo of a language that still wants to be remembered, and maybe one day it will. You step into a lamplit parlor, not a ruin, not a tomb. This room has carpets, porcelain teacups, and the faint smell of damp wool and ink. Welcome to the 19th century, a world of cravats, monocles, and breakthrough obsessions. You're in the company of scholars, soldiers, colonial officers, and eccentric codebreakers. Tonight's dinner guest, the Rosetta Stone, of course. On a velvet-draped table in the center of the room lies a plaster cast of the slab that changed everything. The original, much heavier, is back in the British Museum, probably causing tension just by existing. But this replica is good enough, and tonight, it's the centerpiece of a scholarly standoff between the French, the British, and one man who would become very, very good at guessing mainstream fact. The Rosetta Stone, discovered in 1799 by French soldiers during Napoleon's campaign in Egypt, contains a decree written in 3 scripts: Greek, Demotic, and hieroglyphic. Same message, 3 languages, that triple repetition, a linguistic lottery ticket. You run your hand over the etched Greek at the bottom. Easy enough for scholars to translate. The middle? Demotic, the Egyptian cursive script used for everyday
Writing, tougher, and the top, hieroglyphs, beautiful, mysterious, stubborn, quirky tidbit.
When the British defeated the French, they claimed the Rosetta Stone as part of the spoils. It was literally listed in a treaty under items of scientific interest, which is the diplomatic way of saying, "We'll be taking that, merci." Yep. Glance at a painting nearby. European scholars clustered around drawings of the stone, arguing, gesturing wildly, probably mispronouncing things. Enter Thomas Young, a British polymath who took the first big swing. He noticed that some hieroglyphs inside ovals, called cartouches, seemed to spell out royal names. Smart, bold, half-right. But it was Jean-François Champollion, a French scholar fluent in Coptic and fueled by espresso-level ambition, who truly cracked it. In 1822, he realized something revolutionary. Hieroglyphs weren't just pictures or ideas, they could also be phonetic. Sounds, letters. Once that door opened, everything else followed. You sit down beside the replica, imagining Champollion, leaping from his desk and yelling, "Je tiens l'affaire, I've got it!" before promptly fainting from excitement, which, to be fair, is a pretty solid academic flex. Historians still argue how much credit Young deserves versus Champollion. Young paved the way, sure, but Champollion sprinted the last mile barefoot in the rain. You sip imaginary tea from an imaginary cup and glance around the study. It's filled with other half-decoded scripts and desperate hope. A clay tablet with cuneiform symbols sits beside an unopened bottle of claret. A Mayan glyph rubbing curls beneath a book titled Letters to the Asiatic Society. You stand and walk over to a chalkboard covered in sketches of cartouches. One reads Ptolemy, another Cleopatra. You notice how the characters repeat, how one symbol, a lion, represents L. It's a puzzle with just enough of the edges done to keep you hooked. One guest in the room, a bearded gentleman who hasn't spoken in an hour, says something like, "Of course we could assume they read right to left." Another slams his tea down. You assume too much. And suddenly you're in the middle of what can only be described as a passive-aggressive decoding duel. There's a kind of giddiness in the air. Like everyone senses that the world is about to change, not because of a new king or a new war, but because dead words are about to speak again. The idea that a language silenced for 1/500 years could be heard once more, it's intoxicating. You return to the stone and trace the edge of a cartouche. The loops are elegant, the symbols precise, a vulture, a cobra, a loaf of bread, all standing in for sounds. It's hard to explain how thrilling it is that cobra plus bread or K, but trust me, it's thrilling. You think about all the ancient inscriptions the Rosetta Stone unlocked, royal decrees, religious texts, poems, curses, and perhaps most beautifully, mundane things. Records of taxes paid, workers hired, food rations distributed. Once Grand Egypt had been read only in myth. Now it could be read like a ledger. You picture Champollion again, poring over temple walls, murmuring sounds out loud. Na, Neta, God. The gods were whispering back, syllable by syllable. One of the men in the room is trying to sound out a line of glyphs using phonetic values, muttering "kakaka" until someone hands him a biscuit to shut him up. The method isn't always elegant, and yet, by the end of the evening, they've moved forward. A little more meaning, a little more understanding. A tiny resurrection. You leave the parlor and step into the hallway of time. The Rosetta Stone didn't just teach us how to read hieroglyphs, it reminded us that writing dies slowly and resurrection is sometimes possible, with enough patience, enough coffee, enough yelling. You glance over your shoulder at the study one last time. The candle flickers beside the replica. The cartouches still glow faintly. Not with gold, but with meaning. You walk into a different kind of ruin now, less grand, more cozy. The breeze smells like salt and baked clay. You're standing near the Mediterranean coast where the palms sway gently and the sea seems to listen. You're not in Egypt or Greece. You're in Ugarit, a forgotten city with one of the world's first alphabets, quietly buried beneath centuries of sand. Before you lies a small clay tablet. No towering monument, no epic fresco. Just lines scratched into wet earth and baked into memory. This is Ugaritic cuneiform, a writing system that bridged ancient pictographs and modern alphabets. And yes, it was found under someone's house, because that's where all the good stuff hides. Mainstream fact. The Ugaritic script was developed around 1400 BCE in the city of Ugarit, located in what's now modern-day Syria. It's a cuneiform alphabet, meaning it used wedge-shaped marks like Mesopotamian cuneiform, but instead of hundreds of symbols, Ugaritic had just 30 signs, that's it. A true alphabet quirky tidbit. One tablet from Ugarit contains what may be the oldest known musical notation, lyrics and all. That's right. The ancient equivalent of a karaoke sheet. You're looking at a 3,400-year-old hymn to Nikkel, goddess of orchards. The original pop ballad. You crouch beside another tablet. It's palm-sized, fragile, and crammed with lines. Unlike older cuneiform systems, this one was streamlined, phonetic, fast, efficient. You can imagine a merchant scratching out a shipment order, or a priest copying a hymn, or a scribe noting someone's debts, because yes, financial anxiety has always existed. Historians still argue whether Ugaritic was a true innovation or just a local evolution of older scripts. Was it created by scribes tired of memorizing 600 different symbols, or did it come from contact with alphabetic ideas floating around the Levant? The arguments, like the tablets, are slightly baked. You pass by a reconstructed room from the Ugaritic Royal Archives. Shelves once stood here filled with thousands of clay tablets, contracts, myths, administrative records. You picture a librarian, with dust on her fingers and a very tired expression, muttering, "We really should invent scrolls." You pause in front of a text that scholars call the Epic of Baal. It tells the story of the storm god Baal battling death, drought, and divine drama. The writing is simple, but the poetry is not. The structure is tight, rhythmic, almost
Like verse. You whisper a line aloud, and even if you don't understand the words, it feels like story. Another tablet lists sacrifices, goats, grain, wine.
the usual divine menu. What's fascinating is how organized it all is. One column shows dates, another shows amounts, another records whether the priest seemed pleased. You stare. Is this an ancient spreadsheet? It really is. Then you find something curious. A tablet, where the same sentence is repeated several times in different scripts, Ugaritic, Akkadian, and Hurrian. It's a Rosetta Stone in miniature, a deliberate exercise in multilingual diplomacy, or possibly a school assignment for an overachieving scribe. You walk slowly past broken pillars and scattered pottery shards. The city of Ugarit was destroyed around 1200 BCE during the mysterious collapse of Bronze Age civilizations. Fires leveled buildings, temples crumbled, the alphabet slept, and then, millennia later, archaeologists stumbled upon it. Under the earth, inside a burnt building, they found the tablets. Not epic monuments, not royal tombs, just letters, alphabetic, elegant, still legible. It changed everything. Because here was proof that the alphabet as we know it didn't begin with the Greeks or the Romans. It started here, in Ugarit, in a quiet coastal city full of traders, gods, and scribes with good handwriting. You stop by a final tablet. The script is clean, the symbols balanced. It's a letter, personal, direct, addressed to someone named Ilimilku. The tone is warm, respectful, and suddenly you realize you're not just reading a fragment, you're eavesdropping. The past speaks softly in Ugarit. No towering obelisks, no gold leaf manuscripts, just clay and clarity. Letters simplified, writing democratized. And maybe that's why this script matters so much, because in Ugarit, writing stopped being something only priests and kings controlled. It became something others could learn, a tool, a habit, a quiet revolution made with a reed pressed into clay. You stand in the wind, tablet in hand, sea on your skin. The letters look simple, but they are the ancestors of all the letters you use today, from wedge marks to words. Now you're in Crete again, but this time the ruins feel quieter, almost self-conscious. You're not in a palace this time, not in Knossos, not surrounded by frescoes or mythical beasts. Instead, you're holding a clay disc. It fits neatly in your hand, cool to the touch, and it looks almost too perfect to be ancient, too symmetrical, too deliberate. Welcome to the enduring riddle known as the Phaistos disc. Mainstream fact: the Phaistos disc was discovered in 1908 at the Minoan site of Phaistos, and it dates to somewhere around 1700 BCE. It's about 6 inches across, made of fired clay, and inscribed on both sides with symbols arranged in a spiral. It's also completely unique. We've never found anything else like it. You trace the spiral, which begins at the edge and winds inward, like someone trying to write a message that doubles as a maze. The symbols are pressed, not carved, into the clay using pre-made stamps. That's right. The world's first known instance of movable type. Long before Gutenberg, long before printing presses. And it was used exactly once. Quirky tidbit? Some of the symbols look charmingly familiar. A running man, a helmet, a comb, a tulip, a plumed hat. One even looks like a head with a mohawk. Others are harder to define, possibly an insect, a house, or an angry loaf of bread. The total symbol count, just 45. But the combinations, limitless, infuriatingly so. Historians still argue what the disc is: a prayer, a hymn, a ritual chant, a game, a menu, a legal document, a catalogue of Minoan gardening tools. Honestly, no one knows. And to make matters worse, the language it's written in has never been identified. It could be Minoan, it could be from a neighbouring island, it could be someone's weekend art project that accidentally made history. You try sounding it out. You can't. There's no Rosetta Stone, no companion artifact. The disc sits alone in its mystery, self-contained, untouched, unsolved. It's like the literary version of a locked door with no keyhole. You pause and consider the materials: fired clay, stamped symbols, spiral arrangement. Someone took their time with this. It wasn't casual, it was made to last. But just this one? No other examples have been found, not even fragments, no context, no duplicates, just this disc, sitting in a museum like it wandered in from another timeline. You pass by a display case showing a side-by-side comparison of the disc and other Minoan writing systems, like Linear A, also undeciphered. Unlike Linear A, though, the Phaistos disc is all curves and stamps. Linear A looks sharp and busy. This looks playful. Intentionally so. One theory? The disc was a song. The repetitive patterns, the spiral form. Some scholars think it could have been chanted or sung aloud, with the rhythm built into the layout. You imagine a priest walking slowly in a circle, singing the disc like a record made of clay. Another theory? It's a board game. Each symbol, a move, a challenge, a rule. You think of ancient children pressing identical symbols into their own discs, copying the mysterious game, never realizing they were leaving behind one of history's weirdest puzzles. Still others believe it's a cosmic calendar marking time, moon phases, or religious festivals. But no matter how many patterns scholars find, the disc stays maddeningly coy. You look closer at one segment. There's a sequence that repeats several times: a face, a comb, a triangle, a bird. It's tempting to treat it like code, like something you could just if you had the right perspective. One researcher reportedly claimed to solve the disc entirely in a dream. Another said it contained messages from Atlantis. A third tried to match the symbols to the language of the
Etruscans, none of them were taken seriously. Rightly so. You hold your breath and imagine it spinning. What if the spiral is motion, not text?
What if you were meant to rotate it slowly, chanting the symbols in order, letting the meaning emerge in repetition and rhythm, and then... What if you're not supposed to understand it at all? What if the message wasn't meant for you? What if it was only ever meant for the person who made it? You blink and stare. The disc sits quietly just 6 inches wide, holding a language that may not exist anymore, or may never have existed outside this one strange object. You glance at the placard beside it. Meaning unknown. Understatement of the century. You look again at the spiral. It pulls you in, not with answers, just with the comfort of a question that's waited 3,000 years and is perfectly fine waiting longer. Now you're flipping through the pages of a book you shouldn't be touching. It smells of old leather, lavender soap, and something faintly metallic, like ink that never quite dried. The parchment is creamy and thick, and each page is covered in strange illustration. Curly plants that don't exist, star charts that don't make sense, and women bathing in bathtubs connected by glowing green pipes. Welcome to the most famous unreadable book in the world, the Voynich manuscript, mainstream.
Fact?
The Voynich manuscript is a richly illustrated codex, carbon dated to the early 1400s, written in an unknown script using an unknown language. It was rediscovered in 1912 by book dealer Wilfrid Voynich and has since taunted cryptographers, linguists, and overconfident Reddit users for over a century. You lean in. The text flows left to right, written with care and consistency. The letters loop and lean, full of rhythm. It doesn't look random, it looks deliberate. Too deliberate, honestly. Like someone was trying to convince you it makes sense. Quirky tidbit. The script is now called Voynichese, and it has never, despite the efforts of AI, military codebreakers, and enthusiastic YouTubers, been deciphered. Some believe it's a cipher, others think it's a constructed language. Still others argue it's a medieval prank taken way too far. You flip to the section unofficially labeled Herbal. Each page shows a bizarre plant. Roots splayed like squid tentacles, leaves curling like question marks. None of these plants exist. Botanists have tried to match them to real species. No luck. There's a possibility some are composites, frankenplants, stitched together in leafy absurdity. Historians still argue whether the Voynich manuscript is a genuine attempt at recording knowledge or an elaborate forgery. Some say it's a lost alchemical text. Others call it nonsense dressed in a scholar's robes. And some, quietly, suggest it may be real knowledge just from a culture or mind entirely alien to ours. You reach the astrological section next. Zodiac symbols appear, Scorpio, Pisces, Virgo, but they're different. Ringed with stars and swimming women, tiny hands pointing toward moons. It's not just a star chart, it's a worldview. One where astrology isn't metaphorical, it's plumbing. Yes, the infamous biological section is next. Dozens of nude women, all oddly similar. Round faces, blank expressions, medieval haircuts, floating in or around vats of greenish liquid. Pipes snake between the pools. Some women hold stars, others pour water from jars. You don't know what's happening, but it's either the weirdest spa menu ever or an alchemical diagram of the soul. One woman stands inside what looks like a uterus. Another lies in a box surrounded by miniature suns. You try to interpret it, but your brain keeps bouncing between sacred feminine cosmology and medieval fever dream. Then there's the recipe section, paragraphs of dense voyniques, each followed by a star-shaped bullet point. No illustrations here, just text. It reads like instructions, or maybe incantations. You squint, you almost feel like it's about to make sense, but then, nope, still gibberish. Beautiful gibberish, but gibberish. Some scholars believe the manuscript might be encoded using a method called steganography, hiding information not through replacement but through structure. Others argue that the patterns match natural language, frequencies suggesting it's not a hoax. But every time someone says they've cracked it, the manuscript rolls its eyes and adds another bathtub nymph. There's even a theory it was written by Leonardo da Vinci as a child in a trance, while dreaming in a language no one else speaks. This theory, you'll be relieved to know, is not taken seriously. One computer model suggested the text may be in an ancient form of Turkish. Another claimed it was Hebrew. A third found patterns that resembled nothing except a random text generator. So basically, it's the original AI hallucination. You pause and run your fingers over a facsimile page. The ink is faded, but still visible. The script flows so naturally you start to believe, really believe, that someone out there knew this language, that this was not just decoration, but communication. You whisper one of the Voynich words aloud, Oterol, Shidi, Kokidi. It sounds like a spell, like an apology from a forgotten world. You step back and consider the whole thing, the illustrations, the unknown alphabet, the bound pages. It's a book, a real book. Someone wrote this, page after page, letter after letter, not randomly, but
lovingly, with purpose, with design. And maybe that's the secret. Maybe the Voynich manuscript doesn't want to be read. Maybe it just wants to be kept, cared for, wondered about, or maybe it's waiting, not for translation, but for recognition, for the right dreamer, the right code breaker, or the right century. Either way, you close the book. Gently, respectfully, it
remains what it has always been, unread, unbroken, unforgettable. Now you're standing on a quiet hilltop at dusk, surrounded by half-seen ruins and wind that carries no language at all. The earth is soft underfoot, and the last rays of light catch on broken stones, inscriptions faded, chipped, or completely are gone. All around you lie the remains of alphabets, scripts, codes, and carvings. The noise of history has lowered to a hum, a hush. This is where language sleeps. You walk slowly, passing scripts you now know well. There's a Sumerian tablet, the wedge marks worn smooth, a pyramid block etched with barely there hieroglyphs, a chunk of tomb wall from Knossos, its linear A inscription like a ghost behind the surface. And you begin to see something else, something behind all these systems, beyond ciphers and alphabets, an impulse, a compulsion, a need. Humans want to remember. Humans want to be remembered. Mainstream fact? Every civilization that developed writing did so not only to count or communicate, but to anchor something, a thought, a law, a memory. Writing is the net we cast across time, and even when the net tears, we still tug at it. Quirky truth? Even now, new scripts are being invented. Fantasy novels, constructed languages, digital glyphs, emojis, 1,000 ways to express I'm here. The code just changes. The message stays. Historians still argue whether writing began with gods, kings, traders, or farmers. Whether it was born of necessity or inspiration. Whether some ancient genius woke up and said, what if sound could live outside the body? But now you're in a place where none of those debates matter. Here, the scripts overlap like overlapping dreams. You see Mayan glyphs floating beside Norse runes. A quipu twisting softly next to a scratched Ogham stone. Runes dance with rongo-rongo.
Linear B recites poetry to the Voynich script. And none of them translate each other. They don't need to. They're not competing.
They're coexisting. You stand in the center of this invisible archive, and for a moment you can feel it. The weight of every untold story. Every name scratched into a coffin or a cliff. Every message lost in fire, flood, or conquest. All of it. Humming just beneath the surface. You run your hand along a stone, not to read it, but just to touch it. To feel that someone else did, 1,000 years ago. Maybe more. You won't crack every code, you won't translate every line, but you are part of the tradition now. You, with your notes app, your whiteboards, your scribbles in the margins. You are part of this chorus of symbols, and long after your voice is gone, maybe a word you wrote will remain. Just one word. Now, as the stars begin to appear and the air turns cool, you walk down the slope from the hill. The ruins vanish behind, you absorbed by shadow and silence. The writing sleeps, but it is not forgotten. The codes are cracked or not. The stories told or not. But meaning still lives in the effort to understand. And tonight, you listened. Wind down, 300 words. You've done enough for now. Let the voices rest. Let the shapes blur and soften like carvings in windblown stone. You don't need to remember every symbol, every tablet, every sound that tried to last forever. That's the work of time, not of sleep. Tonight, let those ancient scripts fade into something gentler. Let the wedge marks of cuneiform soften into gentle divots on warm clay. Let the jagged lines of linear B dissolve into ripples on a quiet sea. Let the tangled knots of the quipu loosen into threads trailing out into silence. Let the moai on Rapa Nui keep their secrets a while longer. You've wandered through deserts, forests, mountains, and vaults. You've held tablets, turned pages, traced stone with your fingertips. You've met scribes and scholars, kings and couriers. You've seen alphabets born in fire, scrawled in haste, etched in love, buried in hope, and all of them whispered to you, maybe not in words, but in rhythm, in longing, in light. Now it's your turn to go quiet. Breathe slowly. Let your thoughts float like leaves down an unfamiliar river. Let the meanings drift away. Let the questions soften. You are safe. You are held. You have read enough. You have remembered enough, and now you sleep. Thank you. Script complete. Your bedtime expedition through the world's forgotten alphabets and undeciphered codes is now at rest. Quiet, curious, and eternal. If you'd ever like another story to fall asleep to, another ruined city to wander, another ancient voice to follow, I'll be here. Sweet dreams.